Jeremiah, called the Weeping Prophet, was the author of the book named after him, as well as others, and is considered one of the major prophets according to Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. His prophetic career spanned the reign of 5 kings of Israel, from Josiah to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was the 12th and last king of Judah before the destruction of the kingdom by King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. Zedekiah had been installed king by Nebuchadnezzar after the siege of Jerusalem. At the time of our lesson, Israel was submissive to Babylon, a tributary to King Nebuchadnezzar II, despite the strong protests of Jeremiah. During the reign of Zedekiah, Jeremiah had railed against societal norms and the leadership of the southern kingdom. Judah was engaged in idolatry, worshiping the Canaanite gods. They had practices of infant sacrifice. Leaders were corrupt, not protecting the most vulnerable, and even taking advantage of the most vulnerable in society. Widows, orphans, immigrants were all subject to societal injustice. Our lesson opens with Pashur and Zephaniah, sent by King Zedekiah to speak to Jeremiah. Pashur disagrees with Jeremiah, even having tried to execute him. Zephaniah, a priest, not the prophet that we studied earlier, was not actively hostile to Jeremiah. Now, let's give a little background here. King Zedekiah had aligned with the Egyptians against the Babylonians who had put him in power, but the Egyptians left Zedekiah to fight his own battle. His city, Jerusalem, surrounded, he sent emissaries to Jeremiah to intercede with God. Zedekiah requested that Yahweh act on Judah's behalf against the Babylonians, as Yahweh had done in the past. Now we get to the real problem. Zedekiah had led Israel in perpetuating an unjust society, and now that he is in this mess of his own making, he wants to turn to God and even get there by using an unwelcomed voice during this time of desperation. With his nation under siege from these horrible Babylonians, Jeremiah had a difficult charge from God to proclaim and witness the destruction of Judah and Jerusalem, delivering his message in the face of unrelenting opposition for 40 years. But Jeremiah's response to this request from Zedekiah was not motivated by a desire to now proclaim, "I told you so," but from a divinely inspired duty to speak for God. Using rather unvarnished words, Jeremiah says to Jerusalem, "Your weapons will become a liability, as the Lord himself will not fight with the city. Yahweh will not fight for Judah, they will fight with the Babylonian army." Jeremiah issues a stark choice between life and death. Israelites, like modern Christians, are often reluctant to humble ourselves in complete submission to God. They would rather walk their own path. Jeremiah is blunt. He says, the choice is clear. If you leave the city and surrender to the Babylonians, you will live in exile, but you'll live. If you disobey the message of God and stay not submitting, you will die. Like modern Christians, Israel is given a choice between a bad situation and a worse situation, and even more difficult than that, they must submit their self-desires and walk out on faith even to get to the bad situation. Jeremiah is blunt. He says, your path is sealed. God has made up his mind. God will execute his wrath on Israel, either by the Babylonian military, starvation and famine, or by disease and pestilence. You cannot run from God. You must submit or die. Next, Jeremiah sends his message to the people. He says, God has made up his mind. The city will be burned and destroyed. Submit, surrender, and be exiled, or stay, fight, and die. Jeremiah is clearly courageously bold as he now sends a message to the desperate, besieged king of Israel, a member of the royal Davidic house. Evidently, there was still a chance that Judah's leadership may repent. In essence, Jeremiah is saying to them, change your ways, leaders. Administer justice as a daily part of your practice, and it is not enough. It is not sufficient to just stop doing wrong. You must set things right. You must restore people. You must provide reparations to those who have been oppressed by the powerful. Not all of Israel lived in Jerusalem. Many people lived in the hills and remote valleys of Judah. They thought that they would be safe from the judgment that Jeremiah spoke of, but in the last part of our lesson, the prophet makes clear that they would not escape either. As I look at the reaction to the pandemic we face, I see some of the finest examples of Christian love and some of the darkest examples of worldly selfishness. God's wrath on Israel was in part because of the way they were treating the most vulnerable. Even today, we still have a choice to show godly love or malignant selfishness. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week.